This is a day and a video I've been waiting months to make and do. I'm so excited. Today, finally going to be lowering properly this 1991 Honda Prelude SI. If you guys are new to the channel, you probably remember my 88 still parked over there. I found this brilliant specimen of a 1991 Prelude with a fuel-injected motor, SI, 5-speed, parked out in Santa Fe, New Mexico for sale. And I drove it all the way back here. I've had this car now for several months. Did a timing belt water pump job on it. Thing just runs like a dream. It needs to be lower. The stock suspension is very bouncy. So when you're going around turns, you just really feel the car kind of stable itself out over time versus like a dip and it come right back to, center. So very soft suspension, stock, and probably needs to be changed anyways. And today I've got some great coilovers for this car, so let me show you. I'm going to be installing none other than BC Racing coilovers on this Prelude. I didn't want to take any shortcuts with parts this time around. On the 88, I put some Megan Racings on. They were okay, but the build quality is so much nicer. Comes with a warranty, parts are replaceable, and they're just top notch. I mean, before I even break one of these out, look at these spanner wrenches. Like, so bougie. They're so nice. Here's a look at one of our front BC Racing coilovers. Just absolutely great build quality. I'm so excited to put these on the Prelude, and should be pretty straightforward. I am a lucky owner of a Honda Prelude 1991 service manual. And so today I'm going to be basically following along. We've got torque specs that I'm going to give you guys, a complete breakdown of the front and rear assemblies with, again, torque specs. And, we're going to follow along and see how the Honda dealership would have conducted such a project. I mean, obviously not coilovers, but the process is basically the same, especially for removal. So very excited. So we'll do a quick little, walk around of this thing and see how it sits. For starters, it's on stock wheels, plenty of wheel gap going on there. And it's the, same story with the rear. Probably about 3 to 4 inch, probably 3 inches of wheel gap. So we're gonna drop this down. I may take these stock wheels off and take my 3-piece 17-inch by 9-inch Heritage wheels off of the 88 and put it on. But I had to roll the fenders on this car to get these wheels to fit, and I don't want to do that on the new one. So potentially, we'll see. We're gonna see how it sits after it's lowered before we make that call. And I also am probably gonna be taking my adjustable rear tow arms off of this car and putting it on the new one, and then putting the stock tow arms on this one, just because I don't feel like buying another set right now, and I have them laying in this 88 Prelude. Step 1, jack up the front of the Prelude. I am going to start on the front. If I remember right from when I did the coilovers on the 1988 Prelude, the fronts were a little bit easier, and I don't remember why exactly. I remember the rears just took us a long time to get the stock assembly out. So I'm gonna start on the fronts. Next up, we're gonna take off the front wheel. Stock wheels have these little hubcaps, so just grab a flathead and carefully pry that cap off. Also, if anyone is hoarding any of these, I need one of them because I'm missing one. And if you have a second one, this one is awfully dimpled. I don't know if you can see that on camera, but it's like dimpled all over it. So I'd love to get 1 or 2 of these. Definitely one, because I'm just entirely missing one on my back wheel. And one of these is factory keyed. So we'll break that off and with the locking key lug. And then the rest of them should be 17 mil. There we go. Stock wheel is off, and look how tiny these are. So small. Next up, we're going to remove the brake hose from the strut assembly. Pretty sure that is actually, nope, that's a 12 mil. So it looks like we have 1 bolt here and 1 bolt here. Okay. I think the tack weld for the factory bracket just broke. Okay, well, good thing is we shouldn't need to reuse those because the new ones come with them, but okay. Was not expecting that. I guess we'll set aside that one for now because technically it's already removed from the strut assembly. We'll grab this one here, which hopefully doesn't do the same. All right, so I got it off. For the record, the longer bolt, at least on mine, was the one towards the back. And right now I'm working on the passenger side of the car. And then this guy, I just ended up having to kind of hold it like this. And then I used just an impact to get the bolt undone, but I'm leaving it in there so that way I know which one. I can remember the long bolt goes in the back and the shorter one goes up front. Next up, you'll notice that there's this fork assembly and then there's a bolt right here. It's called the shop manual calls it the pinch bolt for the fork. Mine is a 14 mil. Just take that out. Looks like so. And we'll probably clean these up and hit them with some anti-seize before we put this all back together. So I realized I misspoke on the lug nuts. I thought I was using my 17, but it was actually 19 mil lug nuts. And then 17 mil to get this pinch fork bolt out, which is down below the axle. You probably have to put one on either side. So I've got a 17. Actually, I'll probably swap that and put the gun on the nut. Like so. That's not spinning, so. There we go, now it's spinning, so I'm gonna hold this side. And off comes the nut, which the factory service manual does say to replace this. Okay. Now we've got our bolt out with the nut, and for the record, the bolt goes in from the front of the vehicle to the back, and the nut goes towards the back of the vehicle. So now, this fork is loose, but I may need to get some like PB Blaster or spray to kind of loosen the shock from the fork, and then we can get the last of the bolts, which are up top underneath the hood, just a couple 10 mils to remove, and then this whole assembly comes out. So I'm just gonna spray, I have some of this Coil penetration oil, and I'm gonna kind of spray it around the collar of this guy to hopefully loosen it off of the shock, or what the factory service manual calls the damper. Actually, that worked like a charm. So that is loose. Okay, I've kind of run out of room to go down with that fork, so I think I'm gonna jump up top and see if I can get those bolts underneath the hood done, and then we can pull this out. Okay, so now we have 14 mil bolts, 3 of them up top here. And if you're using an impact like this, make sure you're using the appropriate sockets, not the chromies like me. I'm just too cheap. Okay, there's 1, 2, and 3. And now, almost lost one. Not that it entirely matters because the new coilovers come with hardware, but don't want to have a loose nut rolling around the engine bay. So there we go, and 3. Now we can hop back down below and try and pull this strut assembly out. I find if you kind of step down on this, it makes it a little easier to separate the shock from the fork. It buys you a little bit of wiggle room. Aha! And there we are. Factory shock is out. And then this is the fork here that the coilover is going to sit in. Okay, so after I've kind of spent some time just cleaning up components back here, I'm going to go ahead and grab our new coilover, and they are what appears to be side specific. BC labels them front and rear. This is an F for front, but then even the two fronts are different with this bracketry here. So yeah, it looks like because our brake hose wraps around this way, I'm gonna use the one that looks like this. So I'm gonna first start by taking these nuts off the top, and then we will seat it upwards first, and then we'll get the fork all situated. And this is what I was talking about, new hardware. So we have some new nice like zinc coated nuts here to use. And now we just slip our coilover up, hopefully without scratching it. Fits like a glove. And we're just gonna finger tighten the nuts on top. Okay, and the reason I did that is so that way it doesn't want to move around too much when I go to put the fork back on. So I'll grab that, kind of get our, I'm actually gonna put a little bit of coil on the inside of this, so that way hopefully everything slips in nicely. Get the fork all situated, and the fork does go a certain way, so pay attention. On mine, the bow goes towards the front of the vehicle. So sit this over the axle shaft. Okay, so now we've got that just seated over it, and then we're basically gonna have to, I think, because the coilover is so short, we're gonna have to raise this assembly up using the jack to be able to get that through bolt in. But I think that's our next step, actually. Definitely sweating through all of my clothes, but I've got the jack lifting up the hub assembly to bring the fork in alignment, so that way I can take the fork bolt, which I'm going to add a little bit of anti-seize to this. That is a lot of anti-seize, but hey, trying to keep the rust at bay. Kind of clean this up a little bit so it's not so glooped on there. Okay, and then remember what I said, the bolt goes from the front of the car towards the back, and we'll just, again, finger tighten the nut on the other side, which I may try and replace, but for now, I'm gonna reuse it. Now that we have the fork in the right spot, I wanna keep raising this up so that way it totally seats at the top of the base of the coilover. Basically just like that. And then we will take our fork pinch bolt. I'm gonna do the same with a little bit of anti-seize on here. And I don't remember which way this went. I'm pretty sure it was this way, but I will double check. Yeah, it would have to be. So I'm gonna kind of just get that snug tight, not crazy, but tight enough. Not down to torque spec, but good for now. And then we're gonna just tighten up a little bit more our top nuts. A little tricky with the brake hose bolts. What I had to do was put the rear one in first, and then, at least on mine, the front little bracket that the bolt goes through on the front side, that actually moves along the brake line. So what I did was spray a little coil in between the brake line and that little mount, and that allows me to slide it, because with the factory setup, it was a little too tight against the coilover. So I just basically moved it a little bit to give a little more slack on one side than the other, tightened those down. Unfortunately, no torque specs available in the manual, so German style good and tight for that one. And then for these top bolts up here, where did I put it? 14 mil. These are gonna be 28 foot-pounds. It's 1, 2, 3. Just double check. 28 foot-pounds. And now the bottom through bolt that goes into the fork, through the fork, is 40, let me double check, because I want to be accurate. Yep, 47 foot-pounds. So set the torque wrench 47. And then if I remember right, this was actually the 17 mil, which we then had to hold a 17 mil on the bolt to keep it from spinning. So we'll get the torque wrench on the nut. Okay, 47 foot-pounds. Nearly done with the front. It's actually going pretty smooth. The BC coilovers, I was a little worried that the brake hose situation was going to be worse than I expected, but it just took me to figure out that that mount slides on the brake hose. And then lastly, just double check that your fork is pushed all the way up. And if it is, should actually, yeah, start basically like raising the car, because now it's compressing that suspension. So we should be really tight there. Let me check the spec. It's a 12 mil. There it is. Okay, and then the fork tightening bolt is 32 foot-pounds. Boom, baby. And that, my friends, before any adjustment, because obviously we're gonna have to adjust all the coilovers once we see how it sits, but that, my friends, is front side number one. And at this point, you'd be good to put your wheel back on, pull this jack out of here. I'm gonna leave obviously the jack stands up because I still gotta do the other side. I'm not gonna, unless anything crazy happens over there, I'm just gonna do that off camera, and then we'll jump to the rear. So, so far so good. Day two of the project, I spent about 4 hours yesterday working on this, just to give you an idea of how long it might take you. And I was able to accomplish both the fronts and most of the driver's side of the rear. I want to point out that all of the coilovers from BC are, obviously they're front and back specific, but they're also side specific. And the only way I was able to tell that is the way that the brake line hose mount on the BC coilovers is set up. So you really want to take your time to match the BCs to your stock setup so you can make sure that the brackets are in the same exact spots. And that should let you know basically what side they go on. Kind of frustrating that you spend a ton of money on BC coilovers, and unless I totally missed it, there was front and rear stickers on them, but that's almost blatantly obvious. But there were no driver, passenger, left, right specific stickers. So kind of annoying that you're spending that kind of money and they just don't have a little sticker that lets you know, because I thought I had the brackets lined up on this driver's side rear, and once I got the whole coilover installed, went to put up the brake line, I realized it was in fact incorrect. And so I had to pull that out and then swap to the other rear coilover. So now 3 out of the 4 corners of the vehicle are done. Let me show you something else. This monstrosity here that is quite tall in length is the stock rear suspension. And what you're gonna have to do to get this out is a lot harder. I did remember correctly, the rears are a lot harder than the fronts. The fronts were very easy. The rears, you do have to use a spring compressor to compress this spring, and then even after that, once the spring's compressed and the spring's not putting pressure on the shock, you then push the shock up to shrink this entire thing's length to be able to get it up and out of the wheel well. Otherwise, it's a huge pain in the ass. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I own some spring compressors that I rented and just decided to buy and keep at one point. So these have come in handy on almost every vehicle I own. If you don't have a set of these, you can rent them from like Advance, AutoZone, O'Reilly's. You just pay for the tool, and then when you bring it back, you get a full refund. So it's basically, it is a free rental tool, but you will, unless you have another idea that I couldn't come up with to compress those, spring compressors are going to be your ticket. And then lastly, this is what I wanted to point out, was the bracket for the mount for the brake line on the rear. I put this one in on the driver's side initially, but this little bracket here was pointing the wrong way, needed to be pointing the other way. So I had to swap out for the other one. So I basically had to do that side twice. And then the other thing is, when I got these coilovers, they were already preset a lot taller. And just to make it easier to slide these in the wheel well, I shortened up the coilover so that way it's almost bottomed out. And then that way it just buys yourself a ton of room to be able to get this up and in there. So we're going to do the last corner now, and I'll show you guys how to do it and then torque specs. Let's go. Now to begin this side, first thing you want to do is take out your carpet lining a bit. Basically the strut tower, it's going to be hard to hold the light and show you. If you can see that way in the back there, just poking out. There's 2 bolts on it, and you got to pull the carpet lining back just by pulling these little tabs out, and then you can undo those 2 14 mils, and that is step number 1. Okay, once you've got those loosened, step number 2 is to remove the 10 mil bolt from the one brake hose that is going to the damper assembly, and then just kind of pull the brake hose aside. Keep your hardware in a safe place. And then now we just take the through bolt off of the rear dampener. You've got a nut on one side, same as the front, and the nut is on the front of the car. The bolt goes from the rear to the front. And then once you've got the nut off, I just take like a screwdriver or something to start to push this bolt through. Use like a rubber mallet. After the most insane amount of time putting these spring compressors on and getting this thing compressed enough and small enough to be able to get it up and out of the wheel well, old shock is out and onto the last BC coilover. So with the BC coilover shrunk down as much as I kind of need to, I left everything loose so I can re-extend it, but just got the 2 14 mil bolts up, or nuts up top, finger tight, so it's nice and loose. And now what I'm gonna do is rotate the coilover back down because my jack is jacking up the car. Otherwise I could just jack this up to meet the fork and put the bolt through, but because this is gonna be way too low anyways, I want to just re-extend the coilover down so that way it'll meet the chassis component that I have to put the bolt through. I hope that makes sense. But basically shrink it to get it in there, extend it to get the bolt back through, and then once we're all said and done here, then we can readjust the coilovers to actually figure out where we want to set the ride height. And now the last BC coilover is installed. Your torque specs for the rear, it actually does give you a brake hose torque spec, which is 16 foot-pounds. The 2 top ones are 28 foot-pounds, and then the through bolt is 40 foot-pounds. All 4 coilovers are done, and the Heritage wheels have been moved over from the 88 Prelude, and fitment is okay. Not 100% sure I'm going to keep these wheels, or maybe I'll rebarrel them or something, but they're a little too wide for not as low as I want to ride this Prelude. Anyways, right now I'm working on swapping the toe arms, which is this kind of long arm going this way. The stock ones have absolutely no adjustment, and I'm going to be swapping them with the ones that I had on the 88 Prelude that do have adjustments, so that way when you lower these 3rd gen Preludes, they tend to toe inward on your rear tires, and with the stock arms there's no adjustment, so you just wear through tires like crazy. So hoping to have a pretty easy little swap here. It's just 2 bolts, one on this end and one on this end, so should be pretty straightforward. And here's a look at the ones I just pulled off the 88. They've been installed on the 88 Prelude for some time, so a little bit of rust going on, which I'm not stoked about. I may order some fresh ones later on when basically shipping was going to take a month to get to me, so I figured just take the ones off the 88 and then put the stock ones from this one on the 88, and then maybe down the line I can swap them, buy new ones of these, put the new ones on the 91 and put these back on the 88 for when I get ready to sell the 1988 Honda Prelude. Here's a quick side-by-side of the 2 arms. So the True Heart arms are obviously adjustable. You can break loose the nuts on either end and spin the bar to be able to push the toe outward or inward, whereas the stock one, 0 adjustment. And by the way, these True Heart arms are actually for a 5th gen Prelude, but they fit on the 3rd gen Preludes just fine. So little tidbit for you there in case you need to fix your toe. 5th gen Prelude rear toe arms. There's a True Heart, and then Megan Racing also makes a set. After a fresh alignment, here's how the Prelude sits. I'm still not entirely sold on these wheels. I don't want to ride this Prelude as low as I did the 88. And riding the 88 lower actually sucked in the top of the wheels more camber, which actually made the fitment more flush. but I just don't want to ride that low with this car. So I'm kind of trying to decide whether or not I should just rebarrel the heritage wheels to make them not as wide, or possibly just selling them all together and starting with some fresh wheels. But overall, pretty happy with the BC coilover install. Went pretty smoothly, no major hiccups. The rear shocks, removing the OEM stock shocks, were definitely the hardest part of this job. But everything else was pretty straightforward. Glad I did the, swapped over the rear toe arms, the True Hearts from the 88, because the alignment shop was able to fix the toe. Probably not going to do much justice on camera, but fix the toe so that way it doesn't toe in on the rear and it doesn't toe out on the front. So excellent upgrade there. Here's the side shot for you. It sits about 2 fingers fender gap front and rear. I had to do that to make sure that the rears didn't rub as the suspension articulated, whereas before it was kind of rubbing on this fender liner and I didn't want any of that. So raised it up enough to avoid that and then matched the front. And that is how we're sitting currently. And then of course a shot from the back. And I'm running staggered wheels, so the rear wheels are actually 1/2 inch wider than the fronts, which looked great on the 88. I had that car dialed, but this car I'm just going a different route. So you can see we have quite a bit of poke there on the rears, not as much on the front, but I'm thinking about, like I said, rebarreling these on the outer lips, so that way it's no longer staggered, if that's even possible. And then obviously bringing in the front about 1/2 inch and the rear wheel about 1 inch, maybe 1.5 inches. So whatever's gonna match to make them not staggered, but overall very happy. And then in upcoming videos, I'm gonna be installing, I have a OEM white, but I'm gonna repaint it, rear spoiler for this car. And then I also have to install my rear windshield visor. Oh, so excited for. If you guys are interested in picking one of those up, I have, I want to say 3 more for sale. 1 boxed, ready to ship right now, and the other 2 just need to get packaged up. But gonna be doing some spoiler and visor installs here on this thing in the next, well, the next Prelude videos. The 1991 Honda Prelude SI is coming together nicely with some good quality suspension components on it, and dialing this in further in future videos. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Let me know down in the comments what you think of today's video, and also where you're watching from. I always like to find out. And with that being said, I will see you in the next one, my friends. Keep elevating. Love you. Adios.